right, this is a screencast on the excerpt that I had you read from Walden by Henry David Thoreau, Where I Lived and What I Lived For. It was chapter 2. Just a little note about Walden itself. The book is actually the result of Thoreau's 2-year stay at Walden Pond in Massachusetts. It's a real place. You can actually visit it there. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. He had grown so disenchanted with societies and the rat race, as he called it, of men getting and spending, and he really just wanted to kind of unplug and remove himself from the equation. And so he initially flirted with the idea of purchasing a farm in Massachusetts, but he wanted to live a really simple life, and he wanted to do that on his own terms. And he knew that if he purchased a farm, he would be constrained to the farm life and the demands of a mortgage and taxes and everything else that comes with life on a farm. And so he literally kind of constructed his own little hut there on the banks of Walden Pond, and for 2 years lived a simple existence. He knew in his heart that the basis that every man needs to survive is clothing, shelter, food, and fuel. And then everything else outside of that was just unnecessary. And he'd seen so many men spend their lives getting and spending and chasing luxury items. And but he knew that the basis of what everybody needed were just those simple items. So he borrows an axe. He builds him a cabin for a whopping $28.12. He keeps his furniture very minimal. He has a bed, a desk, a lamp, some cooking utensils, a table, and 3 chairs. He starts a garden outside, which is going to become the primary source for his food. And then anything left over, he sells it for surplus for extra money, which he pours back into his simple life there. And he really finds that he can live for a year from what he could earn in just a few weeks through some extra little day labor jobs and the selling of his surplus produce. And so he's out there, he's in this little hut, and he studies, he meditates, he enjoys nature, and he really starts the process of creating a spiritually rich life there in nature. And it allowed him to start kind of reflecting on the way that men lived their lives back in the real world, and how much time and energy they wasted trying to live a life as a cog in the machine or in the rat race, and then chasing all of these things. And so the first part of chapter 2, he's talking about it's kind of a rollover from chapter 1, which was called economy, where he's actually talking about his creation there on the pond. This is kind of in the beginning. It's kind of a runoff from that, and he's talking a little bit about his initial desire to purchase a farm, and he decided that wasn't necessarily what he wanted to do. He didn't want to have that all those guidelines kind of tying him down. And so he's talking about this place and how simple it is. And he talks about especially how in the mornings were his favorite time. He would go out and he would bathe in Walden Pond. He would take his daily bath there, and it was a spiritual experience for him. Every day he would get up and he would bathe in the pond, and he calls it a religious exercise. And one of the best things, which I did: renew thyself completely each day, do it again, and forever again. And so it was like a rebirth every morning that reminded him that he was alive, that he was awake. And so that kind of starts musing, um, his whole musing about um, the life that he had walked away from, and that how other men lived their lives. So he details his desire to live deep and to suck out the marrow of life in this hut. And honestly, it causes him to think, and to kind of reflect about the way that people live their lives. And he says that they're asleep, that people that are living are not even awake. If they had not been overcome with drowsiness, they would have performed something. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in 1,000,000 is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 million to a poetic or divine life. To be awake is to be alive, and I have never yet met a man who was quite awake. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our sounding sleep. He says that the men that he once was surrounded with were continually in a sleeping state, that they moved through life drowsy and slumbering, toiling without purpose, asleep spiritually. He said to be awake is to be alive, and he'd never met someone that was truly alive. And then I love this. He says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And so this is that attempt that he makes in this 2 year period to mine or to skim off or to suck out all of the marrow of life in the world around him, the natural world around him. And in doing so, those things that are of spiritual value to him. And in doing so, he moves further away from that sleeping state that he once shared with all those men that he once lived among. One thing that he finds himself able to do in his new situation is to he kind of the natural world kind of awakens in him the faculty of imagination, which allows him to view the world and himself really in a whole more spiritually perfect way. The old ideal is that God created man, and that God created within each man their predestined kind of slot or purpose in life, and that we strive to fit into our slot. And Thoreau says that this is not the way that it should be. We should be the center of our own universe. Thinking back to our discussions on Emerson and transcendentalism, Emerson and Thoreau were of the same vein in that, we should rely on ourselves and look to ourselves and believe in ourselves and the truth that we have within us. And that's very much what Walden is about, is finding that that inner voice and trusting it and pushing it to the forefront and living a deliberate life. And so he believed that, he in his consciousness is the center of the universe, and that he wouldn't fit in, and that the world will fit around him and exist in relation to him. And so I think that that's very much what the intent of Walden is to teach us or teach his reader to live deliberately, to live simply, and not concern ourselves with getting and spending, but to awaken those most basic needs and fulfill those most basic needs and live more simply, in tune with ourselves at the forefront, and mining that knowledge out of the nature that is around us.